on the QAP final rule, which was released just July 2nd, 2014 to the public and not yet even published in the Federal Register. So we wanted to take an opportunity to share insight and what we've digested from the rule and try to help the industry to understand what this means to renewable fuels and RINs in the marketplace. So some people are still rolling on, and that's great, and we'll just get the introductions and move forward with the material after that and give people a chance to get online to see the bulk of the material. I want to introduce today's speakers. I'm Susan Olson, the VP of Biofuels at Genscape. I basically manage the QAP business as well as other supply chain information parts of our business for renewable fuels. And I'd like to introduce a couple of business associates of mine, Larry Schafer and Manning Feraci, both from Playmaker Strategies. They're both principals there. Larry and Manning, many of you on the call are familiar with them and know them from trade associations related to renewable fuels and their involvement there. They're both governmental affairs experts with decades of experience related to renewable fuels and the associated regulations and laws. So I'm happy to have them with us today, and just wanted to ask Larry, if you want to go first, just a couple of words to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Susan. Appreciate it. I think you did a nice job of the introduction, so I will leave it at that. We're happy to be with Genscape today, and any questions that anybody might have as it relates to this or other matters in the biofuel space, just feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be as responsive as we can be. So thank you.
Very good. Manny, you want to say a quick hello?
Just very quickly, Susan, we appreciate the invite to be on. We think we have what I think you're going to find a pretty informative presentation for participants today, and echo the sentiments of my colleague Larry that if there's anything that we can be of help with, feel free to reach out to us offline.
Very good, very good. So I wanted to make sure to mention that we certainly appreciate your questions, and as there's actually a window in the GoToWebinar where you can ask questions. Only the presenters, myself, Larry, and Manning, and our marketing staff that are helping us out today with this webinar will see those questions, so they will all be treated anonymously, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. I think that asking questions really kind of enriches this type of experience, so really encourage, don't be shy and put your questions out there. Most of you, I think, are familiar with Genscape, and so I won't take a lot of time to introduce our company, and we'll keep it brief. But Genscape is a company that works to create better market transparency in the energy and agriculture industries, and we do that through a special brand of providing information by actually measuring data and we actually measure more than 1 billion data points every year. We have independent monitors that actually physically monitor energy infrastructure such as power plants, crude oil storage, natural gas facilities, petrochem pumping facilities, agricultural yield growth, and many other things. And we're an international company. We've got about well over 250 employees now, and we're headquartered where I am today in Louisville, Kentucky. We also have offices in Boston, Boulder, Houston, Amsterdam, and Hamburg, Germany. So we've really tried to work to put a new spin on QAP and other credit integrity processes with a very low-touch, high-tech monitoring solution. And we're also, I think this will come through a little bit in the presentation, but working on ways so that this can be repurposed for multi-uses to solve multiple audit problems at the same time for renewable fuel producers to reduce what we have come to know from producers as audit fatigue. So basically just going back there, we have about 46 obligated party clients across our different parts of the products of our organization, and we also have about 40 renewable fuel producers as part of our biofuels business, representing biodiesel, biogas, cellulosic, and other fuels across 3 continents. So this has been an international business for Genscape. So this is kind of what we'll talk about today. Manning's going to go through a quick background, kind of at a high level, the genesis of where this quality assurance program came from. We'll then go through the highlights of the QAP final rule and then other changes that are not exactly related to QAP but adjacent to that were also finalized in this ruling, including things like export RVOs. We'll talk about EMTS changes, the current beta version, and what to expect, and also, especially for the interim program, how to make sure that the RINs, in terms of the A RINs and B RINs that are being bought and sold in the marketplace, are authentic A RINs and B RINs. Then have a brief word about commercial RIN insurance, and then talk about Pathways 2, which was another rule that was released at the same time as the QAP rule. And we just didn't want to leave that out because it is so closely related to RFS2 developments. So we'll briefly touch on that, and then we'll finish off with some development updates and just a reminder about our next webinar on QAP. So Manning, I'll flip it over to you to talk about the kind of the genesis, where all this came from.
Okay, thank you, Susan. And again, I want to thank everybody for calling in and participating in the webinar. And again, to reiterate, I think you're going to get a lot out of the meat and substance of the program. And as we were visiting with Susan about putting this together and putting together the presentation, just a brief recap. We thought it might be helpful to go through, as the slide indicates here, what was the genesis of this program? Because understanding where it came from and how it came about, you can kind of understand what the policy objectives are and what they were trying to, what EPA and Congress trying to accomplish broadly, and it helps give some, we think, some pretty useful perspective on the overall quality assurance program. So, not on the slide here, but just a briefly recap. So in December of 2007. Congress passed, then signed the Energy Independence and Security Act into law. And this created the RFS2 program. So there had been a previous version of the RFS that was in law. RFS greatly expanded the program out and set up the different categories of fuel, cellulosic and advanced biofuels and biomass-based diesels. The regulation implementing the program went into effect in July 1st of 2010. Subsequent to the new rules outlining the form and function of the RFS program, there were several high-profile incidences in the marketplace of RIN fraud, where you had bad actors in the space who were engaged in out-and-out fraudulent activities, and there have been, as I think that this audience is pretty well aware of, there have been criminal prosecutions, Department of Justice, what have you, going after who were engaged in this sort of fraud. But it certainly did lead to the issue getting some significant attention. For example, in July of 2012, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, the Oversight Investigation Subcommittee, had a hearing where it had biofuel producers, stakeholders in the space, obligated parties, the EPA, all testified talking about the impact that RIN fraud was having and potential solutions. And as you see here on the slide, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, the impact from a policy perspective, obviously aside from the obvious negative consequences of fraud, is that you had a situation where liquidity and transparency in the marketplace, in particular for RINs being generated from smaller biofuel producers, was being adversely impacted. So, as a result of these, of these activities, EPA, worked with various stakeholders across the marketplace, and in January of 2013, unveiled a proposed rulemaking setting up a voluntary quality assurance program. And then in the interim proposed rule, you had basically a two-tier system of the A RIN and the B RIN. Both of which provided affirmative defense for obligated parties. The A RIN, which obviously Genscape has been involved with, provided for RIN replacement in situations where there were issues with the RIN. And as we'll talk about a little bit more, as the program went into effect and it was an interim basis, you saw pretty widespread acceptance in the marketplace of QAP RINs, and showed some pretty success, had some significant success in achieving what it was supposed to do, which was free up liquidity in the marketplace. And then, as Susan mentioned, all of this led up to the issuance of the final rule just very recently on July 2nd, that we're going to be spending the majority of the time going through in the presentation. But we just thought it was helpful to provide this general background so that you understand how we got here, what the genesis of the program is, because it does provide some useful perspective as you look at things going forward. And Susan, I think we can go to the next slide.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Manning. Just a quick note, I did get a note here from somebody in the audience that may be having a little trouble hearing you. I'm not personally having that trouble, but I think it's just a reminder we'll all speak a little more clearly in case that there are some communication issues on the other side.
Okay.
So Manning, that kind of cues this right up. I just wanted to, what you said, I think we've seen in the marketplace, according to the EPA's document, the preamble, about 480 million RINs have already been assured as part of the interim program, which provides an affirmative defense and also RIN replacement benefits in the case of the Genscape A RINs. So really, I think what the program has even done so far, it's a restoration of parity to RIN prices for QAP participants that have previously been receiving deep discounts. And we've actually, gotten data from our producers and also some anecdotal evidence that point to this. So we've also seen through the interim part of the program that QAP language has been adopted in counterparty agreements, which is a good direction in terms of the QAP program, starting to take hold. Just in general, the finalization of the QAP rule, has just happened, but I think that the interim and bridge period really helped foster adoption in 2013 and 2014, so we're not just starting from scratch. And so I think that was a very positive thing for the industry, so we're not really starting from just an initial point, but have already been through an interim period of this. So I think the final point here is that, Genscape is involved in market transparency, and I think that a commoditized RIN really opens the door to liquidity and improved market efficiency for these RINs. So, as Manny had discussed, we kind of ended up with a tiered market after several episodes of RIN fraud, and so I think where the industry, desires to go from a market efficiency standpoint is a commoditized market where, a RIN is a RIN. So I think adoption of QAP will continue to build liquidity in the RINs markets. Manning, any other comments on that?
I think that you summed it up quite nicely there, Susan. Just in terms of, from a policy perspective, in terms of what the initiative was designed to do, which was A, encourage, fraud, and B, have, parity with RINs and transparency in the marketplace so that the program can function effectively and do what it was supposed to do, that the QAP program has clearly made a positive contribution in that regard.
Great. I really appreciate the intro too. So now we'll jump into the QAP final rule highlights. We'll go through several slides of this, breaking it up first of all into an overall, and then we'll get into some things that actually affect specific parties. So the first point that we wanted to make is the QAP program remains voluntary. The QAP-A and QAP-B will be formally recognized through December 31st, 2014, so both of those types of RINs were finalized in this rule. On January 1st, 2015, there will be a new unified QRIN program, which will look very much like the current BRIN program. If EMTS can accommodate QRINs before that date, then actually those QRINs will be available prior to January 1st, 2015. It's a matter of when they can be tagged in EMTS, the EPA's moderated transaction system, as to when that program becomes effective. A big change is that the QAPA program is being phased out as of December 31st, 2014. The preamble mentions that commercial solutions may emerge in its place, and I'll be talking a little bit about those later. So if you look at the graphic, the way that the EPA refers to the period between February 21st, 2013 and January 1st, 2015 is dubbed the interim period. But keep in mind that the RINs during this period, the A and the B assurance plans that were proposed for this interim period will have fully recognized benefits and will actually be written into the rule. So that also includes retrospectively audited RINs. Then after January 1st, 2015, then we'll have the QRIN program, which will be a unified program very much like the BRIN program. And Larry, one of the questions that we've gotten recently is that I know that there are some similar quality assurance programs and other credit systems. One of the things that I've been asked is why is this particular program from the EPA in terms of quality assurance voluntary? And could you share some thoughts on that?
Yes, Susan, thank you so much. I think one of the things that EPA is trying to do with this rule is recognize that the affirmative defense program that they have created is one that folks really have a chance to opt into. The program has been a buyer beware program. from an obligated party point of view, and I think everybody in the industry across the board, from petroleum company to biofuel producer, recognize that the ability to have some defense mechanism, a civil defense mechanism to this program, was a worthwhile objective. So in EPA's effort to try to hold down costs rather than to make a part of this program specifically mandatory, they thought that the best way to do that would be to continue this as somewhat of a voluntary program. So in looking what EPA has done, they've been fairly adamant from the beginning that this program was going to be a voluntary program, so that if you choose to opt into it, then you also choose to accept the responsibilities and do the work under the affirmative defense side of things as well. So I think that's generally why it's voluntary rather than why it's mandatory across the board. If it were a mandatory program, then the cost of compliance would increase, because there would be a compliance cost generally across the board, and I think everybody recognizes that part of the program as well. So in EPA's effort to try to lower costs or eliminate costs for some folks that didn't want additional costs, kept it as a voluntary program.
Got it. That's very helpful. So it's a matter of kind of creating this freedom of choice, whether you need it or not, making a decision for your business and your risk profile, and then having a choice is what it sounds like. Yes,
I think that's correct.
That's very helpful. And I think, like I said, there are other similar programs out there that may not have that option. So it seems like, that having an optionality is going to be a positive thing for some of the industry participants out there. So, now we wanted to kind of break this down into final rule highlights about how this affects different segments in the industry. So I want to first talk about the QAP auditor requirements. Genscape is a QAP auditor. We've been, registered with the EPA during the interim period and are now going through the processes to get the program registered, after the effective date of the final rule. And so we're set to go on that, and everything should be a seamless transition. But wanted to talk about some of the things that changed. So, QAP auditors will now be regulated entities under the EPA's RFS2 system. So, registration, attestations, those kind of things that are required for other RFS2 participants will now be required for QAP auditors. I don't think there's any real surprise there, but certainly that is something that was finalized and changed. One of the second things is that a QAP auditor must be independent of the RIN generator for the same facility. So that not only does that mean if you are a RIN generator, you can't be your own QAP provider, but what that also means is that it applies to RIN agents that are generating RINs on behalf of producers and other RIN generators. So, Genscape has made kind of a business decision some time ago that we were going to kind of steer clear of expanding our business to RIN agency on behalf of our producers, and we kind of thought that there may be some conflict of interest there, and it would be a kind of something that we wanted to stay away from since we were focusing on the QAP aspect of the business. So we'll just stay the course on that. We have training programs to help producers basically, learn how to generate RINs and coach them through that on their own, and then there are also commercial options out there for that. So, we'll be maintaining that degree of separation for our QAP business. The other thing is that an independent third-party auditor cannot own, buy, sell, or otherwise trade RINs unless there is a special requirement for retirement or an existing ARIN mechanism. So I think that one of the themes of the rule was really auditor independence, and that was a real focal point of the final rule. And Manny and Larry, I just want to ask if you had any thoughts on other aspects of that independence that are presented.
Susan, this is Larry. I will just jump in just a little bit. In the work through this process and with all the parties that were involved, it became evident fairly early on that one of the reasons why there was fraud is because there was not an opportunity for some independent mechanism to verify or validate what was happening at the RIN generation process. So in working with EPA and working with OMB and others, it became evident fairly early on that the type of a system that would be the best system is one that functioned much like the accounting world functions, with auditors who come in and audit your records and your books, but don't actually do the work on them themselves. So that level of auditor independence really makes this program dramatically stronger than it otherwise would be, and relieves EPA, if you will, a lot of policing responsibilities, and I think we all know that EPA has a hard time with bandwidth issues the way it is. So the fact that this program is required to have an independent auditor actually makes this program dramatically stronger. So I think most sectors across all industries applaud that aspect of this program.
Sure. Manny, anything else to add there?
No, I think that covers it extremely well.
Great. All right. I'm glad you brought up the, kind of the accountancy and those kind of things, because another part of the QAP auditor requirements, Larry, is that there are, other bars that QAP auditors have to meet. One of those things is that a licensed professional engineer needs to be on the team, and site visits must be overseen by that engineer. That doesn't mean they necessarily have to be performed by the engineer, but they are responsible for overseeing and signing off on those visits. The oversight can be provided by an entity that has completed RFS2 engineering reviews for the same facility. So the EPA kind of drew some very specific lines about what can be done by QAP auditors and what can't be done by QAP auditors. And this is one of those things that can overlap. So a professional engineer can do QAP work for the same facility and also do an RFS2 engineering review for this facility. And actually, those two things can be combined for cost savings and be done at the same time, and the EPA actually recognize that in the preamble to the final rule. So, I think also something that we're striving to do is to kind of relieve this, what we've heard called audit fatigue is basically to try to combine, multiple things that need to be done at a facility into one visit, so long as it doesn't violate any conflicts of interest. So, certainly I think that helps the industry and again, can work towards this cost savings. Another line that was drawn is that an annual attestation in the QAP cannot be performed by the same CPA entity for the same facility in the same year. However, you need a CPA to be a member of your QAP team. So, one thing that I wanted to point out here is, as many of you may know, that we have, Christensen and Associates that was brought up on the first page there as one of our business associates in QAP, and they'll still be able to provide attestation services to our clients, which they've done in many cases. But we're going to use our own internal CPA resources for our QAP team to keep those things separate. So this kind of gives an example, and also specifics to the industry out there that may have questions about that. I think that we're very clearly delineating that as part of our QAP program, or from our QAP program. The other thing is that, just to mention here, the independent third-party auditors must have E&O insurance, professional liability insurance, and disclose that level that they possess when they enter into contracts to provide QAP services. So just so you're aware of that. Manning, any comments about these auditor requirements that come to mind?
No, I thought you did a very nice job of going through them, and again, I think it's consistent with the theme that you pointed out on the previous slides about striving to have to encourage independence to improve the overall integrity of the initiative itself.
Sure. No, I think that definitely that was a theme in the final rule, and I think that was something a lot of people were pushing for. I mean, when you're having a program that really is about integrity, I think most of these things make sense. So. The other thing, and this really will be there's just a couple more slides on the audit requirements, but that site visits are required once a year with remote monitoring technology, or twice a year without remote monitoring. So, remote sensing is something that Genscape has used for our QAP plans, and we're going to continue to do that as a core part of our program. So the remote sensor monitoring plans must be approved by the EPA. The EPA makes mention of such technology as cameras and other types of sensors within the rule as examples of remote monitoring. Genscape, employs several classes of these types of monitors in our efforts. And again, I think the remote monitoring helps relieve multiple site visits per year. And as an added bonus, it provides near real-time RIN insurance. So it's something we'll continue to do. We use a lot of passive non-contact monitoring options that really work to simplify things for QAP for producers. And just to give a lot of people out there might want to know, well, how does something like this monitoring work? So I wanted to show an example of the type of things that Genscape obtains from monitoring. And I try to genericize this because we do a lot of different types of renewable fuels that have very different monitoring schemes, but effectively work on very similar principles. So for instance, if it's a liquid fuel versus landfill gas, you know, those are obviously different fuel types versus renewable electricity, for instance. But we have sensors that kind of work off the same type of balancing concept for each type of facility. So, you know, for instance, you could compare a pump and compressor, you know, pretty similarly across the type of things that they do in a renewable fuel facility. So this is kind of showing, you know, 4 different buckets of things that we typically monitor. The feedstock, or for instance, landfill gas, reagents that may be used as additives to the process, or that are actually chemical reactions that happen within the process, finished fuel, and then co-products that result from the renewable fuel processing. So, you know, from each of these, we basically get, you know, what's shown here is like a line graph, and then we can detect certain things from this graph going forward. We can see how much feedstock or how much input gas is coming into a facility, how much reagent is being used where that's applicable, if reagent is actually being recovered, fuel production, co-product production. Basically from all this you start to get a real-time mass balance, and we also start to get signatures of facilities that say, how do these fill and empty rates statistically compare to the normal process at the facility? We also look at things like timing comparisons from the time from feedstock usage to the time when fuel is produced. And where it's applicable, we often get signatures of loading and unloading. So this is effectively the core of how our monitoring scheme works. Most of the monitors that we use are passive. They're non-contact. They don't interfere with any of the piping or tankage or anything that's used in a facility. Of course, they're proprietary type monitors, so not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this call, but basically they you know, they serve this purpose that's shown here, which, you know, do a really good job of telling the real-time story of what's going on at a renewable fuel facility. Finally, for the QAP auditor requirements, QRINs require a minimum of quarterly data collection. Under our current QAP plans, we're collecting data more frequently, and so we'll actually likely require that data less frequently once the QRIN program takes effect. In the meantime, we do have to collect according to our current frequency because that's the interim plan that's accepted by the EPA, and we have to stick to that. As soon as we can transition those, then we'll be, you know, contacting our existing clients, and you'll see those new things in our new master services agreements. The preamble also discussed that QAP auditors must sample and test finished fuel and compare to applicable standards. We're working to get some clarity with the EPA on exactly what that means in terms of frequency and to understand the ultimate purpose of that. Comparing fuel to applicable standards can mean a lot of different things. So in most cases, I think what they're looking at are things like, you know, for biodiesel, for instance, the ASTM D6751 standard. Again, I think we have to understand exactly what that means for biogas and renewable electricity, but we're working to get clarity, and by the time we have our deep dive webinar on July 31st, we should have answers to those questions. Just to mention that we have done this, we've actually included a voluntary fuel standard quality test in each of our QAP plans, and that's something we've done with all of our producer clients, and so we'll continue to do that as part of this new QAP era. So I'm just going to pause there for a minute and ask Larry, I mean, any thoughts about, you know, kind of where the auditor requirements landed or anything I brought up here that you think, you know, is worth additional comment on?
Not at this time. I think you did a good job. Clearly, EPA put a lot of time into where to draw the line on a number of different issues, and we can discuss in lots of different circles whether or not they did a good job or not on that. But I think from a big picture point of view, they clearly highlighted where they think it's important to have auditor independence. They're also trying to save folks money in some areas as it relates to the test engagement. And I think that they've recognized finally that when you do real-time monitoring, that looks a lot like a daily audit as well. So the requirement to do a double audit versus a single audit if you're doing real-time monitoring makes sense as well. So from many aspects, at the end of the day, they put together a fairly fairly common sense program as well from that perspective. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. So I think that just to provide clarity, the monitoring also works in conjunction with other things that we have to do as a QAP auditor. So we also have to obtain access to a producer's EMTS transaction. So we're actually comparing RIN generation with production and looking at RIN separation with data that we collect from the client, including things like receipts, bills of lading, product transfer documents, samples of those types of things, and other data. And that's combined with the annual on-site visit that's now required as part of the QAP. And then we combine those things and do analysis and then put that basically into a customer view or a registered user view where RIN buyers can actually look and see in real time, what the status of a QAP client is. And so that information is available on demand for registered users. I had a slide here going into the data, but I'm going to just to skim over that because I think we pretty much covered, kind of the data types that might be required, and we'll do more of that in the deep dive. I now want to jump to what this means to RIN buyers, and we'll talk a little bit about two things here: limited exemption and then also affirmative defense. So, one of the things that was finalized in the final rule is that obligated parties are now offered a 2% limited exemption for invalid B RINs and Q RINs for the years between 2013 and 2016. So if an obligated party is required to retire or replace these types of RINs, the amount up to the limited exemption in the calendar year is excused. And so that actually includes 2013 and 2014 for B RINs, and for every year beyond that for the Q RINs, it'll be its own individual thing. So the exemption is actually broken out in the final rule by fuel type, and that's cellulosic, biomass-based diesel, advanced biofuel, and renewable fuel. And so kind of as it shows in the diagram there, each of these chunks that can be split out, there's a 2% exemption for that particular fuel type. I wanted to talk a little bit, Larry, you might have some comments on kind of what this means to the industry in terms of having this limited exemption and kind of the risk mitigation that provides.
Thank you, Susan. I think EPA here is just simply trying to recognize the fact that the interim program had a 2% exemption in it, and the marketplace was looking at that, generally speaking, as something that might be in the final rule. So to extend that for a couple of years beyond where we're at today, I think it just simply allows the transition to move forward in the most flexible way possible, and the least inobtrusive and not disruptive process. So from that point of view, EPA really, I think more than anything else, is just simply trying to take out all of the reasons why there would be volatility in the program, and to include the 2% limited exemption for a couple of years for certain parts of the program makes some good sense. And we haven't heard a lot of negative feedback about that, generally speaking, when speaking with different parties in the marketplace. So it seems like EPA did a fairly good job on trying to address that issue.
Sure. No, I think that's really great insight, Larry, and I think that it's good to hear too that that's been well received in the industry. And then so just moving on quickly to the affirmative defense. So this is something that was finalized for A RINs, B RINs, and Q RINs, so long as some other key provisions are met. And that little sidebar here just talk about what is an affirmative defense and what benefits are offered. Effectively, an affirmative defense offers relief from notice of violations and associated penalties and fines for invalid RINs. And eligible parties are actually parties that transfer or use invalidly generated RINs, not just parties that use, but also parties that transfer, as long as they aren't the generator of an invalid RIN. So some things about the affirmative defense. QAP is obviously part of that. The RINs have to be QAP RINs for affirmative defense to be asserted. There are also some other provisions. It's limited to prohibited acts. The party that's asserting can't have involvement in or forward knowledge of invalidity. So an example would be if you knew a RIN was invalid but accepted it anyway, then that would potentially be a violation of that provision. There's also a requirement for timely and proper notification, so there are very specific criteria within the final rule about the time in which you have to notify the EPA of an invalid RIN and the proper way to do that. Also, somebody that asserts an affirmative defense couldn't have a financial interest in the generator. So if there was a financial interest in the producer, that, you know, the producer's facility that generated the RIN, then that could potentially invalidate the affirmative defense. There also has to be appropriate accounting for invalid RINs represented in the record keeping of the person that attests this. So, and I just wanted to make a quick reminder here that the replacement provisions will still hold through ARINs through expiration. So Genscape has QAP assured over 100 million ARINs up to this point, and you know that replacement obligation will remain in place until expiration. So, and that's 2018 for 2014 RINs and the end of 2017 for 2013 RINs. So Manning, I wanted to ask you about, you know, the limited exemption and affirmative defense. Any comments on, you know, that anything that I've missed here that you would like to add about, you know, what this means to the industry?
Well, Susan, as you have throughout the presentation, I think you did a very nice job going through exactly what, you know, what was in the, you know, in the final rule. I mean, as you look at this, I think that when you saw the comments that were put on the docket, the affirmative defense was something that was pretty universally highlighted as something that was important. You see that reflected here in the final program, and you know, in general, it's going to, you know, it probably will help adoption of, you know, the QAP program in general. But in terms of the actual content, in terms of what you can do, I think you did a nice job covering what the EPA put in the final rule there.
Susan, let me just jump in a little bit, and this is important if you are somebody who wants to claim the affirmative defense. Susan did a nice job of listing the elements, the 5 or 6 elements that are here that you have to do if you want to claim the affirmative defense. I would take this part of the regulation and the rule, and I'd sit down with my legal team and make sure that as anybody who's in the chain of the transaction, that you understand what it actually takes to avail yourself of that affirmative defense. For example, when we talk about timely and proper notification, you actually have to notify EPA within a specific number of days of when you are aware of some type of a fraudulent transaction or something uncanny about your RIN, in order to avail yourself of the affirmative defense. So we're very generic in terms of highlighting those things, but do take a look at this section very specifically, and your legal counsel will clearly want to do that. So if the rule says you've got to notify EPA within 5 days, if you notify them on the 6th day, boom, you're kicked out of the affirmative defense program. That is the reason why you would have one of the reasons you'd have a QRIN to begin with. So again, this is we're highlighting these things, but it's also very important to understand exactly what your responsibilities are in this respect. So most of you, I'm guessing, have pretty substantial legal teams available. So make sure that your legal staffs have an opportunity to take a look at this, so that they can prepare an internal plan in the event one becomes aware of some transaction or some invalidity transaction that would cause the affirmative defense program to initiate itself. Susan?
And
thanks, Larry.
This is Manning again, real quick. And I was looking at some of the questions that were being submitted, and just it says it on the slide, but it's worth reiterating. The affirmative defense, which is a significant provision, this is only applicable to QRINs, the Q and A, the A and B RINs in the interim period as well. So that's an important fact to make sure that folks understand.
Well said. Yeah, it's very important. I mean, it applies to the interim period as well, so going backward to the beginning there of 2013. So if the QAP was A or B was applied then that would certainly help someone garner an affirmative defense in the case of an invalid RIN. So. Great. All right. Well, there are some other things here that are not specifically related to QAP, but that were in this QAP final rule. And so we wanted to just go through some of those and talk about what they mean to the industry. So there are some new registration and reporting requirements that are part of RFS2, and we wanted to let the producers that are out there and the RIN generators out there know about those. So now I know that there are more exceptions here than rules, but I want to carefully go through this. So these new registration and reporting and record-keeping requirements that we're going to talk about do not apply to the fuels listed here. So denatured or ethanol, for instance, renewable diesel that meets these ASTM standards, biodiesel, renewable gasoline, biogas, and renewable electricity. What I'm getting ready to say does not apply to these fuel types. So you may ask, oh, well, what fuel types do these apply to? Which is a great question. Butanol is an example. Also, fuel additives that are classified as renewable diesel but are not drop-in fuels. Those count and are specifically discussed there in the, basically discussed within the preamble of the final rule. So anybody that does meet the criteria.
Susan, are you there? We've lost you on the audio. Larry or Manning, are you there?
Larry is here.
Let's give Susan a minute to get logged back on. She may have dropped the call. Susan's dialing back in. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks. I'm not sure what happened there. It just thanks for letting me know though that it dropped off. Did you guys continue without me?
We waited for you, Susan.
You did. Okay. Well, I'm sorry for the dead air time there, everybody. Actually, I just wanted to I just went through this slide here and just wanted to remind everyone these registration updates are coming up soon. It's the effective date of the final rule, which is 60 days after publication in the Federal Register. So, basically, Larry and Manning, I want to ask you if you want to get some context around kind of where this is aimed and kind of how that the rule took into account to try to, have end use covered and not go back on to, basically separate RIN generation violations from end-use violations and kind of how this rule is working to do this through some of these registration requirements.
Yes, okay, Susan, I'll take that a little bit. In the world of biofuels, generally speaking, and what happens with them once they're in the marketplace, it's really very difficult to track what happens once that first sale into the marketplace happens. So the intent at the point of the transaction, the initial transaction, has to really match up what you intended for it to be. So the intent here is to be used as transportation fuel, heating oil, or jet fuel, which is what the statute and the regulation generally require for purposes of using biofuels in under the renewable fuel standard. However, there's lots of things that can happen with all of those things later on as that fuel is then sold throughout the marketplace as well. For example, diesel fuel that's blended with biodiesel could actually be used to run a generator, right? I mean, so it doesn't necessarily have to go into, or the end use doesn't necessarily have to end up in transportation fuel, something along those lines. But it's unlikely that the company or the entity that does the sale at the beginning knows what that fuel is going to be like at the end of the day. So what EPA, I think, is trying to do here is they're trying to strengthen the requirement and include in your PTD, in your product transfer document, exactly what your intention is at the point of sale. So they've created new language that says you've got to have this in your PTD up front. They're not going to worry too much about later use of things as long as up front you had a clear intention of what you were going to do. Now, if you had a different intention but you sold a product directly to a generator or something along those lines, if you will, and you included the documentation up front, but you use it for a later for a use that wasn't consistent with your intent, then you would have some problems from an enforcement point of view from EPA. So I think they're just simply trying to clarify. There have been a lot of questions in the marketplace. There have been a lot of activity in the last 2 or 3 years that this program has been in place about how EPA should actually enforce some of these types of things. So I think what EPA is really trying to do is try to clarify and make cleaner the PTD document, the language on it, and what that means to the marketplace. So I think that's what they're trying to get to from this point of view.
Got it. Got it. Manning, anything to add in there? I think he may just be on mute, but well, I tell you, we'll just we've got some quite a bit of material that we're hoping to cover today, probably a little bit ambitious. So so I'd like to try to end on time with a little time for questions. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through the next few slides, and we won't break too much for conversation. Then when we get closer to the end, we can all chime in and talk about some of the things that may want to add to this. So just moving on, also in addition to those registration requirements and that Larry gave some really great commentary on, there'll also be commensurate quarterly reporting requirements that will include total renewable fuel produced and some other things. These will also include affidavits from blenders or users of the fuel in neat form. Now keep in mind that this does not apply to those fuels that are typically drop-in type fuels or for engine use. So the fuels, that doesn't apply to denatured ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, any of those fuels up there. And also, again, we'll help. So Genscape will provide its clients with templates for the updated registration, reporting, and record-keeping requirements, so that people that are part of QAP are not on their own here. And please, like I said, even if you're not a current client, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So like Larry was saying, there are some new statements that are required on product transfer documents, and there's a specific statement required by fuel type, and just give an example of what's required for ethanol. But basically, it again reinforces that the volume of fuel is intended for use as transportation and jet fuel. And it also just keeps them, puts in the front of mind for somebody that receives this product transfer document. If they're exporting the fuel, then they're subject to export requirements. The transferor, so the person that's actually transferring the fuel, must still not know, as the intent of the rule has always been, or have reason to know that the fuel would be used for some other purpose. So as long as those conditions are met, then improper end use of fuel does not invalidate a RIN, and that's very clearly stated in the rule in the preamble, so long as these registration requirements, product transfer document requirements, and the quote-unquote knowledge requirements are met. A party that designates fuel for which RINs have been generated and then takes that fuel and uses it for a non-qualifying use has an obligation in and of itself to retire an appropriate number of RINs, and that's something that also, like Larry said, kind of clears up these issues about end use and who's responsible for retiring RINs. Furthermore, on the export side of things, the rule reiterates that any renewable fuel exported, whether it's in neat form, in concentrated form without blending with a petroleum product, or blended, requires the exporter to calculate an RVO and to retire that number of RINs. RVO is a renewable volume obligation. Basically what the rule does here is clarifies and emphasizes that the portion of renewable fuel counts towards the export RVO even when it's blended. So there was possibly some confusion about that, and they really just clarified that stance on the rule within this ruling. The rule also makes an amendment to indicate that you don't incur an RVO if you're an exporter if the RINs weren't generated from the fuel to start with. So if fuel is intended from export, RINs were never generated on it, that fuel does not incur an RVO. In that case, the burden of proof is actually on the exporter. So the exporter must maintain a specific affidavit from the fuel producer so that they have that on hand. The rule, however, does not waive an RVO if RINs were retired upstream of the export. So if RINs were generated and then retired, it still doesn't necessarily waive the RVO, and you can find that, more specifics about that within the rule. Some of these things we're going to have a deep dive webinar as a follow-up in 2 weeks that will go through RIN invalidity and talk about what to do if your RINs are invalid, and that'll be one of the things that we discuss. The rule also, probably much to the relief of everybody on the call today, does not require additional blend level labeling, and that was suggested in the proposal. So there was some talk in the proposal about requiring additional labeling for lighter blends, and that did not go through. We'll just talk a little bit about EMTS changes. Right now, the EMTS, there's a beta version out, 3.1.1, and actually there are new fields already identified in this version that represent QAP. So once the QRIN program is in place, then QRINs will actually be identified in EMTS. So RINs with verified or unverified status will be able to be differentiated in EMTS via a status code. So the EPA is still finalizing the functionality. The expected launch is around the January 1st, 2015 timeline, both based on the language in the final rule and also based on continuing and ongoing work that the EPA is doing on this system. So again, a QAP auditor is not permitted to transact on RINs within EMTS on behalf of a facility, but it can actually operate with read-only agent access. And just so you know, the current status is that A RINs and B RINs will not be reflected in EMTS. So that's something that you need to figure out a way to have authenticity from the individual QAP provider or from the clients that you're doing business with if you're a RIN buyer. So just a brief look at the changes in EMTS. They're actually, you can download what the templates look like from the EPA, but there'll be a QAP provider name, a QAP provider identifier, and then also a QAP service type. And you can see the only service type code right now that's available is code 30 unverified, but once the QRINs will be available, there'll be a second service code. I won't go into detail about this. I'll just skip over this slide briefly, but we have gotten word from the EPA that there may be new association requests required from producers that become associated with the QAP auditor. And just wanted to let you know that the most efficient way to make that happen is if you have an electronic signature agreement in place. It's basically, allows electronically authorizations to happen for associations to happen with other agents without having to do this on paper, and it actually happens much more quickly. So we just want to try to make the industry aware of that. If you don't have your ESAs in place, then certainly now would be a great time to consider doing that. In terms of RIN authenticity, like we were saying before, A RINs and B RINs won't be available in EMTS, but you can certainly get this information from the Genscape dashboard for our clients. So if you just go to the link here, and you'll have that in the slide deck that if you haven't gotten it yet, you'll get it after the presentation today. You can view each of our producers, if you're a registered user, their QAP status and that they're QAP verified or on their way to getting QAP status, whatever state they're in towards getting that finalized QAP. And then also, we issue transferable certificates on demand, both to producers and RIN buyers if that's been previously arranged. So this can be a good way to keep your records that you have a QAP certification for A or B RINs. And Q RINs, you'll have EMTS for that. For A and B RINs, you'll need something else to have that burden of proof. We also offer on-demand validation, so if you're a registered dashboard user and you want to know, send us a list of RINs and which ones are A or B or Q RINs, we're happy to provide that for you free of charge. So any registered user can get this service we like to provide that because we think it can help during compliance intervals just to make things more streamlined and reduce RVO headaches that can happen around these compliance intervals. I want to just briefly talk about what we're working on in terms of commercial RIN insurance. So as we spoke before, ARINs are going to be phased out at the end of the calendar year. Genscape ARINs were about 20% of all RINs assured by the interim QAP, which was not an insignificant number. So, and we also have been listening to the industry and believe that there is a place in the market for RIN replacement, RIN insurance type mechanisms. So we also found that our clients were getting economic value from this type of RIN insurance that was offered by the QAPA program. So we currently have a proposal in hand and are negotiating the terms of a commercial insurance product. I'll be able to share more details as this evolves, but basically what it does is it transfers the risk, beyond the RIN generator to Genscape and potentially an underwriter, so that the RIN buyer is not stuck with RIN generation risks in a worst case type of scenario. So that's something we're working on. More details forthcoming. And then we didn't want to leave this without mentioning Pathways 2. Pathways 2 is a separate rule altogether from the QAP final rule, but we wanted to mention it because they are interrelated in that they're related to RFS, and there are new pathways, and new pathways actually usually lend themselves very well to having extra assurance and due diligence to help speed up liquidity for the RINs in the market. So that's why we wanted to discuss this briefly today. Some of the things you'll find in Pathways 2 is that there are new pathways for RFS2 RIN generation. There's CNG, LNG, and renewable electricity from biogas, and these will qualify as cellulosic fuels. In the proposed rule in Pathways 2, the biogas that would qualify, the biogas feedstock that would qualify for cellulosic RINs was really just limited to landfills, and the source has been broadened to digesters in the final rule. There's some comments about things that are actually considered crop residue. They specifically mention corn kernel fiber, other grain fibers, sweet sorghum bagasse, and various types of straw. And they're actually listed in a table, and I think they're listed individually now in 1426, or will be as soon as the effective date of the final rule comes about. There are also some various amendments to record-keeping and reporting. One worth mentioning is that there are small blender considerations. They doubled the upward delegation from 125,000 to 250,000 gallons a year. There are various detailed changes to E15 misfueling mitigation regulations, and also some changes to the ULSD survey provision. So the sampling actually required is smaller. So there are a lot of things that are new here. We're working on a webinar with some other experts in the field to discuss this in more detail, but wanted to just make a quick mention of some of the highlights of that rule here. And then finally, we've always said as a company that we're in this for market transparency and in it for the long haul, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we've been up to on the development front. We actually have launched a new biofuels dashboard, and we present up-to-date information on 587 renewable fuel facilities out there of all fuel types. It's searchable and downloadable. We have people that are intently working on this full-time that basically update this information continuously. Also, you can find here Genscape QAP client information for registered users, so what's the QAP status? Also, in the spirit of market transparency, we've launched 3 different products in the biofuel supply chain. We have a corn yield forecasting product called LandViewer. We're also have a product for ethanol production monitoring that's based on natural gas nominations. And we also monitor the ethanol inventory and storage, actually physically measuring tank levels in New York Harbor. And we issue that once a week. So if you're interested in any of those things, please reach out. We're happy to talk more about those. And we'll be updating our landing page in the future to be more streamlined. We also will have a return of the facility map, which has made a brief disappearance in this current release, but will be coming back soon based on popular demand. And then also we'll have producer-client operational tools. So we're working with our clients. One of the things that's unique about the monitoring technology is that it can actually be a functional use to the clients themselves. So we've been working with them, and we'll continue to work with them to basically present something like benchmarking or operational fundamentals that will help producer clients through this data that we're getting through QAP. And that's something we plan to bring to bear in the first quarter of 2015. So Larry and Manning, I know I was kind of racing to the finish there, but wanted to ask before we take a couple of questions here if you had some comments that you wanted to add in finale of any things that I've kind of gone through here in the last few slides.
Susan, I will wait for the Q&A process. Thank you.
Susan, I'll do the same. You did a nice job running through that in a timely way.
Thanks. Most people on the call will probably be happy to know I'm getting a little hoarse, so I'll have to give most of the question time to you guys. So I'll pick a few out here, and let me let you know if we don't get to your question, we will answer them afterward, either individually one-on-one, or usually we'll send out something that has a Q&A to the people that have attended. So one of the questions is, can you go into more detail about why RINs retired upstream of an export don't remove the requirement for retirement upon export? And I think that's a good question. I'll just take my quick take on this, in just recalling what I remember from the preamble was that, if you don't have that kind of documentation that shows that, RINs were retired, by the generator or retired by the person that actually exported, that there may be some traceability issues there. And Larry and Manning, I don't know if you guys got that deep into this part of it, but if you had any comments about that, that would be helpful. Please feel free to chime in.
Susan, I'll take that a little bit, and for more clarification on the question as well, please help me if I'm going the wrong direction. For purposes of export, I think all EPA is really trying to do is they're trying to clean up, if you will, some of the activity that happens when one exports petroleum fuel. So you export finished diesel fuel, you export finished ethanol. It's likely that that product will have some blended biofuel in it by way of export. So there are a lot of ideas about how to address that, and when you go through the comment period in the comment process, and you look on the docket about that, there are about 20 different ways of how to address that issue. So I think what EPA finalized is an approach that makes sense, where they basically said, if you are exporting a biofuel, when you do that, you are required to retire the RIN, and you're required to take on an export RVO as part of that process. So they closed the window of when you have to do all that to about a 30-day time frame, and they also basically said it's your responsibility to know what that blend level is for the export as well. So for biodiesel, for example, they said if it's a B0 to a B5 blend, then it's either you have to designate that as a 5% export and retirement, or you have to tell us what the exact number is. So they're just putting the onus on the exporter to show exactly what's going to happen and what that volume is being is exported. And what they're worried about, I think, more than anything else, is they're worried about the changes, if you will, or the overstatement, if you will, of the RVO being diluted a little bit, because nobody really knowing what's in that gallon of export. So I think what EPA is really trying to do here is just simply create tighter rules for folks who are exporting, who are in the business of exporting, for purposes of actually trying to get a better handle on what the export is, what the volume of the export is, and recognizing that there's going to be blended fuel that makes its way overseas as well. So that's, without going too deep, that's kind of the generic way of looking at it.
No, that's very helpful context around that, and I think that there are some again, we'll look into this question in a little bit more detail in terms of, okay, well, why doesn't the retirement upstream of an export remove the requirement for retirement on export? I mean, that's a really good question, and to find out why there was a differentiation between those two things. And we'll regroup and actually put together some written answers to these questions as part of this Q&A, and I think that the context that Larry's given is great is a great help there, and certainly puts that into perspective. But we'll follow up with more there too. One of the questions we got was, can you briefly touch on the recent change in defining biogas and landfill gas RINs and D3 versus D5? That's absolutely right. So there were some distinctions in, the proposed rule that still left some biogas-based transportation fuels as D5 RINs, and they have been converted over to D3 RINs according to the table that's in the final rule. So that'll appear in that 1426 of ECFR. So ECFR Part 80. So biogas-based transportation fuels are primarily all D3 RINs now versus D5. And in terms of the details of that process of how that's all going to, how that transition process is going to work, the first step is that the pathways to will have to become finalized, which I believe for it is a little sooner. It's 30 days after the effective date of the final rule. And then I'm sure there will be some registration things that may have to happen in CDX. Please contact us with if you need help with those things. As time goes on, we'll have a better, more detailed understanding of exactly how that process goes, but it certainly isn't exactly laid out right now anywhere. So we are still learning along with the industry on how those transitions work. One of the questions that we got here was if someone is a new registrant, should they wait for QAP should they wait for the QRIN to be in place before being a part of QAP, or will ARINs and BRINs roll over to QRINs if registered before January 1st, 2015? I think it's a really good question, and from our perspective, typically registration and QAP onboarding can be done concurrently, so that actually saves time. Our QAP BRIN program and QAP ARIN programs will roll over seamlessly into the QRIN program, so there really isn't, and that's actually outlined in our master services agreement that will be issued. So there really wouldn't be anything else to do there. So my recommendation would be start both processes at the same time. It'll save you double work, and we'll get them done faster. And Larry Manning, I don't know if you have any comment on those things.
I'd agree with you on that, Susan.
Absolutely. So, and I know we're a little bit over time here. It's about 3:07. So what we'll do is we'll actually we'll take a few more questions here. There's a lot of questions, so we won't get through them all during this period. But again, we will answer them. And so we'll basically cut it off about 3:15. Of course, if you have to drop off, we certainly appreciate your time and participating in the webinar today. We just want to try to get a few of these questions answered. There's still a lot of people on the line. So one of the questions is that if a producer supplies A, B, or Q RINs, how does an obligated party know that the supplied RINs came from the QAP program? For instance, the questioner says for 2014 RINs where a producer claims to be under the B program, how do we know that they're covered if they would have come into the program, say, in March, but sent us a January produced RIN before they entered the program? So from our perspective, and actually I can maybe back up a few slides here, what we do is we typically show on the dashboard what the current compliance status is and how long that compliance status has been in place. You can't see that right here from this screenshot, but if you scroll down, you can actually see the time that a producer has been part of the program and what their status has been and what date the status started. The other thing that we do is we provide certificates, and these certificates actually have the organization name, facility ID, batch numbers, EMTS ID, dates that things are produced, what the RIN year is, so that all these primary keys provide a unique identifier to particular batches. So you can get that directly from us. So if you need that, you can call us up, or if the producer can also provide that to you. But if you feel more comfortable getting it directly from us, then please by all means reach out. The other thing that we provide is on-demand validation, so that if you have a list of RINs before your RVO is coming up and you want to know which batches of those RINs are A's or B's or status quo according to who's in the Genscape program, then please just send us that list, and we'll be happy to help you, with that compliance research. Another question. There's a couple of questions on the export front. So Larry, I'll just turn those your way, and then if there's anything more that either myself or Manning can add, then we'll chime in. But the question is, can you produce a denatured gallon without actually generating a RIN, and is that legal for export? So Larry, you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it, and I think I generally understand the question. in the ethanol space, but I don't know the answer off the top of my head, and I'll have to go back and take a look at it. So I will work with you, Susan, to make sure we get a response to that by email, by writing.
Yeah, got it. I think that one of the things that, just based on what I've read from the preamble to final rule, and agree with Larry, we'll put our heads together and make sure we get it right. But I think that the EPA was actually trying to promote if you know that you're going to export a fuel when you produce it. If you know that fuel is going to be intended for export, or you're going to sell it to somebody where it's intended for export, then you can actually not generate RINs for that particular batch of fuel, and that you would want to produce an affidavit that said that you did that, so that the person downstream would have that evidence of the exported fuel not having RINs generated associated with that, because that would prevent them from having a renewable volume obligation. So that would be the reason for doing that. Again, we'll get together and get back to you with the formal answer. Lots of other questions here. There's one question that says that this particular participant today has not yet seen a specific QAP certification provision and counterparty contracts for the purchase and sale of QAP RINs yet. What direction is the industry headed regarding this? Manny, do you have any thoughts on kind of what you've seen from the industry and kind of where your perception is on where counterparty contracts are going?
Sure. Well, I think, Susan, if you take a look at the experience in the interim period, where you started to see a greater acceptance and inclusion in these counterparty agreements, and based, and again, not scientific by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the conversations that Larry and I have had with folks subsequent to the final rule coming out, it would be we would anticipate that you're going to have significant marketplace acceptance and utilization in these counterparty contracts of QRINs. And again, that's just based on initial feedback that we received, questions we received from people, and again, the experience that Genscape and us, quite frankly, had in the interim period with the program. So I would expect that you're going to see marketplace uptake on this. But I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it as well.
Yeah, I think that just from, we can't go into any specifics, obviously, but as part of what we see in the business is that we see, various contracts and things like that, and talk to people in the industry about the formation of those contracts. And even during the interim period, we started to see references to QAP in those counterparty contracts. So now, I mean, you have to look at the numbers out there. During the interim period, that was about 400 million RINs. Now, keep in mind that was pretty much all advanced fuels, as I recall from what I know about the industry. So, and that was during an interim period. But to start to see the uptake actually happen then, I think was starting to give some direction already to where the industry is going. So, I also think that I'm not a lawyer and legal expert, but certainly if you have a contractual provision that requires QAP, then that certainly could be a help if you're trying to assert an affirmative defense, and, kind of as a basis for that. So I would suspect that would be a reason why, that might start appearing in counterparty agreements.
Hey, Susan, one other thing to add to that as well, and generically, as we referenced it, the program had been operating you had a proposed rule, you were operating on an interim basis, you saw, what I would gauge is characterized as pretty significant uptake in the marketplace. Now you have a program that's final, so now the marketplace, the people know what the rules of the road are. You have a final rule in place. There's not a great degree of uncertainty has been removed now that this rule is final, so that now, obligated parties, biofuel producers, all the stakeholders in the marketplace, they have some reliability in terms of what the regulatory requirements are going forward. So I think that again, I think that will be reflected as you move forward, as we move forward from this point forward with the program.
Yeah, got it. No, that makes sense. So I think we have time just to squeeze in one more question, and then we'll call it a webinar. So the question is basically that, and I completely understand this question. It's basically saying that still need some clarity on the requirements for QRINs versus ARINs and BRINs. Can you clarify this and whether biofuel producers must have ARINs, BRINs prior to 2015 and QRINs 2015 onward? So just as a first point to this question, all of the QAP programs are voluntary. So no one has to participate. No one must participate in a QAP program. It's a completely voluntary part of the Renewable Fuel Standard. Right now we're in what's called the interim period of the ruling, and actually I'll let me bring up just a quick graphic here on a slide that I think may help with this. Basically, we're in an interim period of the final ruling, and even though it's called interim, it's actually finalized. But that period goes from February of 2013 that will go to December 31st, 2014. And basically, during that period, that's when the ARINs and BRINs will be applicable. Those were the RINs, the dual RIN types that were proposed in the interim QAP program. Once the rule goes final, the EPA has decided basically to make it a single unified program called a QRIN program, and that will begin January 1st of 2015. So again, all of these QAP measures are voluntary. ARINs and BRINs are during the interim period. Although it's interim, the benefits will be formally and fully recognized when the final rule becomes effective. And then QRINs will be recognized January 1st, 2015 forward. Effectively, the BRIN program will become the QRIN program, and that's how this program will transition very seamlessly across that January 1st, 2015 border. And once the QRIN program is in place, then EMTS designation will be available for the RINs.
So, Susan, let me just jump in. So if you're doing an ARIN or a BRIN today, you keep doing that until December 31 of 2014. And that's your choice. You can do a BRIN or an ARIN today. After January 1 of 2015, you will have one RIN choice, and that's called a QRIN, which will look a lot like today's BRIN. So if you're a biofuel producer, you're using a BRIN today, and you want to be part of a QAP program between now and the end of December, you will continue to choose, just like we've been functioning under the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, under the interim program with an ARIN or a BRIN. After January 1, then your choice is a QRIN, which looks a lot like today's BRIN. How's that?
Definitely appreciate the clarity there, because I think that's a great place to end, and that's kind of what it's all about. So you know, and a lot of times I know, you know, as a QAP auditor, sometimes we spend quite a bit of time in the trees here. So that was very well said, Larry, and I appreciate that clarity. And just want to thank you and Manning both for participating and for being co-speakers with me today, and appreciate all of your contributions and insight and knowledge on these issues, and really think it was a very, very valuable. I wanted to mention to everyone on the call, we will have a deep dive webinar on July 31st at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can register at the same place that you registered for this one, which will come in your slide deck. And I also wanted to mention, if you're registered for this 4-part webinar series, you don't have to re-register. If you do, that's okay. You'll receive a reminder either way and login information when the webinar approaches. So Larry and Manning, I'll hand it over to you for any final words, and then we'll close it out from there.
Susan, I'll just say thank you, and we look forward to continuing to provide guidance and advice to all those that we can. Thanks.